the way I like to think about it is like a rising tide raises all boats. And that's where we are with battery storage right now. We need so much more battery storage, but we need different types of energy storage to meet different demand niches, right? A microgrid is different than a car, is different than a city, is different than something that would be needed at a generation facility. We need all of it. I want lithium-ion batteries to have success. I want QuantumScape and Northvolt to succeed in their solid-state lithium because that helps society see it and adopt it.
The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by the Clean Power Consulting Group. Check out all of our content at cleanpowerhour.com. Please give us a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify so that others can find this content. Today, we are going to geek out on organic flow batteries for the energy transition. My guest today is Nate Kirchhofer. He is the founder and CEO of a small company called BioZen Batteries based in Santa Barbara, California. Welcome to the show, Nate.
Thank you, Tim. Great to be here.
Really pleased to get to know you a little bit and learn about organic flow batteries. I knew nothing about this technology before we met a couple weeks ago. And so I look forward to, bringing this content to our listeners. Storage is so vital, as you and most of my listeners know, because solar and wind are wonderful, but they're intermittent. So we need to be able to store that excess energy. And if you are not aware of this, there is just a tremendous excess of solar and wind energy, right? Thousands of times more solar and wind buffing the planet day in, day out. On the order of 5 to 10,000 times more sunlight than all of society uses, right? So we're just swimming in energy. It's a matter of capturing that energy so that we can use it when we need it. And that's why batteries or any storage device is so useful to the energy transition. Coal itself, right, and oil itself are storage devices. They're just made by nature and millions of years of sitting in the ground. And now we're inventing new, better ways that don't put carbon pollution in the atmosphere because that is going to disrupt the future, long and short of it. So give us a little background on yourself, Nate. How'd you get interested in energy storage and what are you guys up to?
Awesome. Yeah. So I finished my Ph.D. at UC Santa Barbara in 2016. My focus during that time was on organic and biological electrochemistry. So I was in the materials department there, which is typically very broad ranging. And so I had a lot of exposure to a lot of different, came to realize, I enjoyed my research, but biology is sticky and gooey and a little bit less deterministic than I wanted. So the things that I learned in bioelectrochemistry translate really well to batteries. The voltages and the currents are just a little bit different. So I kept thinking and seeking a way to apply what I knew, and batteries are a natural fit. But I also have a lot of expertise in organics, meaning carbon-based compounds for your listeners. And so the lab I worked in grad school, we worked on organic semiconductors. And so basically now what we're doing at BioZen is taking that expertise. I also have a couple other co-founders that are PhD level chemists and another MBA. And we're using that to apply what we know to be early movers in the organic flow battery space. And yeah, I'm super excited to be in this space. There's a ton of momentum, and very clearly our society needs this sort of solution.
Yeah, it's, I like to say that we already have much of the technology we need to make the clean energy transition. Mark Jacobson, who's the famous energy transition academic at Stanford, has a new book called No Miracles Needed. And he's just referencing that we have all the tech basically, but we need better tech when it comes to batteries. And so there's going to be a lot of evolution in the battery space. Of course, we already have EVs. We already have stationary storage at scale using mostly lithium-ion technologies or flavors thereof. And that's all well and good. And I have quite a bit of content coming out on lithium ion storage and other forms of storage. But I guess it would be very helpful if you would paint a picture of that landscape, the storage landscape, and why you believe that there's a niche moving forward for organic flow batteries, and then contrast, if you would, organic flow from vanadium flow, which is the dominant flow technology I think that we see on the market, and it is on the market today for stationary storage, albeit still early days.
Yep, no problem. I love this question. And I think you hit the nail on the head. We need more energy storage. I think you're saying that sort of early in your intro. There's a ton of generation available. And actually, side note, I think basically everything that you named, sun, wind, and even the coal and gas that we see, those are all stored sun energy. Even wind is sun energy because it's a thermal fluctuation. And so we need to harvest that, right? But in order to harvest it and use it, we need what I would call an energy mix, because each different type of battery has sort of an ideal use. You know, the lithium ion batteries that we see are great for mobile applications. We want those to have success in cars, in your phones, maybe even on boats and things like that, where weight is important. And this is why the incremental advances we see in lithium iron phosphate and some of these new iron-based chemistries are so important, and solid state lithium. They're important because we can get lower weight, higher energy density, higher current densities for aviation, things like that. So we want to have that see success. Now, as you may have seen, the prices of lithium skyrocketed in 2022. They're probably coming down a little bit now, but demand is really dramatically increasing. And right now, if you look at the forecasts, so I think one of your prior guests, I'm not sure if this episode is live yet or not, but it's Quantum Energy Inc. They're another Santa Barbara company that we know. They do a lot of forecasting of these sorts of things. But in order to get to a 90% energy generation from renewable energy by 2023, we need to scale up our battery energy storage or energy storage generally by 150x. So that, you know, right now we're not even keeping the lights on with renewable energy. We need to get to the point where we can manufacture renewable energy with renewable energy. And so we need a mix of energy storage that allows us to harvest that the sun energy that we're collecting and use it when we want. And so, you know, that 90% renewable energy that I'm talking about is going to cost ratepayers a little bit more in the short term, but it alleviates a ton of these other costs. And the reason I'm saying all of this is because we want to silo these different types of energy storage from each other for different applications. So lithium ion, based on its thermodynamics, is actually really well suited for something like a 4-hour discharge. And this has to do with the fact that the lithium is both the reactant and the electrode inside of a lithium ion battery. So your power and your energy density are tied together for that type of cell. Now, for something like a flow battery, we have tanks of fluid that store the energy, and then we have a central reactor where that fluid is pumped through and electrons are transferred. And that central reactor is where the power conversion happens, whereas the tanks store the energy. So you can think, if I make a bigger tank, I can store more energy in this battery, regardless of the size of that central reactor. So this gives us flexibility in the power to energy ratio, making the flow batteries tunable to different applications. And I think you alluded to it as well, that vanadium is the dominant technology. This is a technology that's been worked on for a while. It's commercialized pretty heavily in China. There's a few projects as well in the United States. The way that battery works is the two tanks of fluid have vanadium dissolved in something like pure sulfuric acid. It could also be a mixed acid solution. And that acidic metal solution is pumped through the central cell. Vanadium is nice because it can exist in 4 different redox states. So it can be +2, +3, +4, +5, and you have 2 of each of those on each side of the battery. And one of the downsides to this type of battery is that the vanadium is super expensive right now. It's something like 50 to 60% of the cost of the entire battery. And that right now is making the capex for a flow battery higher than for a lithium ion cell, which is why flow batteries are not winning contracts on the same scale that lithium ion batteries are. There's also maybe a technology maturity thing there that contributes. But when we are talking about having these huge wind farms, huge solar farms, we need stationary batteries that are complementary to those generation facilities that aren't moving. We call those stationary because they don't need to be in your pocket. They don't need to be in a car. And so the weight of those batteries doesn't matter. And so if you look at flow batteries from a kilowatt hours per kilogram perspective, flow batteries are way worse on that metric. But I say worse, but it doesn't matter what the number of kilograms is because it's never going to move again. It's just sitting there next to the solar farm so that we can push that energy into the grid when the demand is there. Okay, so that was a little bit of contrast of lithium ion and vanadium. I guess I could dive in a little deeper and just say that like the best lithium ion cells right now are probably something like 500 watt hours per kilogram, whereas flow batteries are probably something like 50 watt hours per kilogram. So it's like an order of magnitude on that specific metric. But from a footprint standpoint, like we're talking kilowatt hours per meter squared of installed batteries, I think there's an argument to be made that flow batteries are actually better because they cannot catch on fire and they're generally easier to install because of that, and install and permit because of that. So I think we have seen a little bit of data out of one company called CellCube, where I think it's about 150% better in terms of kilowatt hours per meter squared of installed capacity for flow batteries. And so let's take it a step further. You asked about the contrast of organic flow batteries and vanadium flow batteries. Our whole thesis as a company is that we are making the fluid that goes inside these batteries, the electrolyte, and we're making it out of carbon-based compounds. And the reason we're doing that is because carbon-based compounds are cheaper than vanadium. So we see similar voltages, meaning similar power outputs out of the cell, except now we're using organic semiconducting materials that are dissolved in water, just like the vanadium is. And we can, to first order, directly replace the electrolyte that is inside these cells. And so our business model is we're making the fluid, which is the critical component inside this battery, but we're not remaking the battery. We want to partner with flow battery companies to give them another option for their electrolyte. And because our electrolyte is something like 1/3 of the cost of the vanadium, we're improving the margins on flow batteries dramatically and bringing their capex down, which makes them economically competitive against lithium ion. So this is the whole thing. I'm an environmentalist. I want to save the planet, but our society is capitalist. And if you want to save the planet, it has to make sense economically. So that's the contrast that I would say. Organics scale really well, meaning the economies of scale of production are well known. You know, we have huge polymer plants, for example, that can produce things on the metric ton scale. And we can use that same knowledge to produce organic compounds. And it can be done globally, right? We don't need to mine vanadium at the vanadium mine. So it scales really nicely as well.
Very good. Very good. I want to talk a little bit more about how this machine works. And you say you're working on the electrolyte, which I think of as the fuel in a way, right? It's these tanks of fluid. And then what is the component called that is going to actually generate electricity?
Yeah. So I think you alluded to something that is very astute, and in a lot of ways, a flow battery is a fuel cell. And you see that because the power and energy are decoupled, just like a fuel cell. And, we're storing these tanks of fluid. So the component that is storing the energy is actually the liquid. So when you think, and this is a good point to disambiguate, right? When you hear the word electrolyte, you probably think of something like Gatorade. And what electrolyte really means is it's an ionic conductor. But what we are making is a redox active ionic conductor. So we're making a redox active electrolyte. I like to use the word redoxolite, which isn't a real word, but it's a word that I made up that I think describes it really well. So what we have is compounds that can accept electrons and give up electrons. And they are ionic. So they're soluble in water on their own, in their own right. And they can accept electrons without degrading or forming bonds or things like that. And we're inventing those. And that is actually where the electrons are stored. So it's these tanks of fluid at high concentration. And as those fluids come into the central reactor cell, we have something like graphite electrodes in there, and electrons are pulled out of one side and pushed into the other, or vice versa, depending on if you're charging or discharging. And it can sit nearly indefinitely. There's always a little bit of capacity fade for various reasons, with the charge actually in the fluid.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where the energy is stored.
And it will not discharge if it's just sitting?
It would take a long time, because the only place where that discharge happens is inside that central cell.
Mm-hmm.
And you have these huge reservoirs of fluid that basically don't have, shunt current pathways. To be seen. I mean, I'm speaking sort of generally.
Sure.
There's always calendar fade and capacity fade pathways in batteries. So it's never 100%, right?
And these reactors, can you buy them off the shelf?
I think you can probably buy some low level things. For example, our test cells that we use in our lab are from a company called Scribner. They manufacture like test cells. And so that's about the size of, I don't know, a pair of headphones, like noise canceling headphones,
mm-hmm.
or something like that.
But is somebody making an industrial sized reactor for flow batteries?
Oh yeah, definitely. There's several companies that are commercializing that. So the word that they typically use for this is like the flow stacks. So there's stacks, there's pumps, there's
mm-hmm.
pipes,
yeah.
There's power electronics, there's the battery management system. So all of that has to be integrated. And so the companies that are manufacturing this that immediately come to mind are CellCube, Volt Storage, Invinity with a V because of vanadium.
Mm-hmm.
There's Sumitomo in Japan. I know I'm forgetting another one. There's another one in Dalian, China. I'm forgetting. That's like the big one that.
But so do you become simply a chemical factory at the end of the day, because somebody else can take this box, put a reactor in it, make it talk to the grid, and because that's not necessarily new technology. Really what's new is this substance that's going to feed that and allow you to harvest electrons to store energy or discharge energy, right?
I think that's a great business model. I would love to be a chemical manufacturer. I would love for us to have the IP and maybe license it out mm-hmm. to these companies that maybe want to use it. I think the reason that we're not pursuing the whole flow cell is just because reinventing something like that is extremely capital and time intensive.
For sure.
And we can make a difference in this technology by focusing on a component, which is strategically good for us from like a resource perspective, but also, these companies have been optimizing their flow stacks for decades in some cases, right? Why try to redo something that they have perfected? So yes, I think being a chemical manufacturer is an absolutely good outcome. Mm-hmm. And I could see it going that way for us. Yeah.
And can this be done at scale in a environmentally friendly way?
It can. So a lot of the reactions that we're using we explore a lot of different synthetic pathways. And by that, I mean like the actual chemical transformations on the atomic scale that we're doing in the chemical reactors in our fume hoods. A lot of times these compounds that we're making are accessible through different reactions. So some of them can be more extreme and less environmentally friendly, but there's often ways of using so-called green solvents that don't harm the environment in their production or in their emission. And those things always translate to the industrial scale. So at industrial scale, I mean, it's kind of shocking the sorts of things that you can do. You can inject spontaneously explosive compounds from a tanker truck into a big reactor and there's no issue, right? So it's really well controlled from an environmental damage perspective, because these organic chemistry reactions that we need are already being done on the industrial scale.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Clean Power Hour or viewing it on YouTube. We do have a great YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed, please go to cleanpower.group and hit that YouTube icon and subscribe to our channel. Of course, you can find all of our content on your favorite audio platform as well. So please give us a rating and a review. Back to the show. It's starting to click for me when you say it's similar to a fuel cell and which is similar to an electrolyzer, right? They're just kind of the inverse of one another, but at the end of the day, it's a box. Something goes in one end, something else comes out the other end, and then electrons are stored or released in that process. We're going to start to see these in the built environment, in transportation and in stationary storage at scale, en masse. Lithium ion is of course already getting traction, and I can't tell you how many lithium companies have just in the last 6 months, right, made major announcements of battery factories in the U.S. Thanks to the IRA legislation. It's really happening. And of course, Tesla being an early mover and vertically integrating, making their own battery cells is very telling. But it's a both and. We're going to see hydrogen fuel cell technology get into transportation for larger scale, for trucking, not so much for consumer vehicles, although Honda, Toyota, and Hyundai all have hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. Those are going to be a real minority niche. So what else, I guess, should our listeners know about your technology, the pathway to commercialization? You're involved in an incubator there in Santa Barbara. Tell us a little bit about that and how you see scaling the company.
Great question. Yeah. So like you said, we are participants in the California Nanosystems Institute incubator, which is in Elings Hall on the University of California, Santa Barbara campus. And that's been amazing because it's a fully stocked facility for us. We have fume hoods, we have analytical tools, all the spectroscopy measurements, NMR, mass spec, things like that you need in order to do these chemical transformations. And it allows us to maintain that academic relationship. But importantly, the university does not have any claim on our IP. So we're tenants in the university. We still support the university, but we're independent as a company. So that's been great because, there's a huge network of resources and researchers that we can leverage there. And, from where we are as a company, I like to be conservative about claims. I would say that we are at something like TRL 3. We're still doing R&D. We're early in this. We're inventing new compounds. We're going to be submitting a provisional patent in the next 6 weeks or so. To date, we've basically done pre-seed funding. So it's a lot of friends and family and small angels that we know. I am working on raising a seed round right now and have about $400K of $1 million that I'm looking for committed. So wanted to shout that out into the ether that we are raising money. If there's some VCs or angels out there that are listening, I'd love to have a conversation, see if it's a mutual fit. But yeah, in terms of scaling, we have to start at these tiny little reactions to make sure that the transformations that we're doing are working. And when we make a compound, we test it electrochemically. If it's got the right redox potential and the right, electron transfer kinetic properties, we scale it up. We try it in a larger device. And that's the sort of iterative testing that is enabled by organic chemistry, because we can literally make changes on the atomic scale. We can change a single atom on a compound and see how it affects its electronic and solubility properties, which have implications for the cell voltage and the lifetime of the battery and all of these sorts of things. So the way I like to describe it is we're making a suite of compounds because our synthetic pathway is modular. And so that gives us a lot of power over the ultimate outcome. I should also say that I believe we haven't signed a contract, but we have a verbal commitment for our first customer, which is a company based in Zurich. And so we're definitely starting to see some traction. I think in the next couple months, we're going to be really starting to scale up production for that customer. And, they're working on their unique flow cell architecture, which has some unique like flow characteristics, and they need our expertise in designing electrolytes. So we're in a really perfect spot to serve flow battery companies with unique electrolytes that can help preserve the environment while fostering the green energy revolution.
Yeah, I want to talk about end of life. It's one thing to be able to put together a useful chemical. Humanity is inventing hundreds, if not thousands, of new chemicals every year, and it's good, bad, ugly, right? Because it's sometimes we don't know what we're putting into the environment, what the environmental and human health hazards are. So what is your vision, I guess, for a human and environmentally friendly life cycle for these chemicals? Can they be repurposed, directly into the same industry or repurposed for other uses?
Great question. And I love this question too, because it has implications for all sorts of energy storage. The way that I should say, we haven't done a complete life cycle analysis because we haven't run a battery completely and we don't know all the things. So some of the things I'm saying are based on assumptions. But with organic compounds, we are able to use the compound for its intended purpose, so inside this fuel cell. And at the end of the life of the battery, I think that we would not be able to directly reuse it in a battery because it is going to break down, just like organic compounds are wont to do. But we would be able to distill off the water, or maybe even not necessary, and then break down the compound that we've made, this organic semiconducting compound, back into something like carbon dioxide or small molecule carbon compounds that could be starting materials for other useful products. And so the way I like to say it is we can participate in a circular carbon economy, and our electrolyte that we're making is actually a carbon sink when it's made, because it, just like green plants absorb sunlight energy and use that energy to build carbon bonds, we're doing the same thing in making our organic semiconductors to create these redox active electrolytes. And so this is in contrast to lithium ion cells, which last I checked, about 5% of them are being recycled. I'm not sure what's happening to the rest of them. Vanadium flow batteries are an interesting one because on the one hand, the vanadium ions, which are basically just vanadium atoms with some charge around them, are in a lot of ways kind of like a fundamental unit. You can't break down a vanadium ion, I guess, unless you're inside a star or something, like you were saying earlier. But because of that, they also persist in the environment for a really long time. So you both cannot remediate them if they spill into the environment well, but they have the benefit of lasting for a long time. Vanadium is also pretty toxic, and it's usually dissolved in pure acid. So decommissioning vanadium flow batteries is actually really painful. There's one in Hawaii that I know of from a company called Uni Energy Technology that nobody will sign off on. They're trying to decommission it, but it's just stuck there, and it's literally just a vat of transition metal acid that can't be moved, even though it's non-operational. So there's considerations like that where, yes, the electrolyte lasts forever, but is it actually recyclable? I'm not sure. It really comes down to the final use. But yeah, from a perspective of sustainability, we really need things that can be put back into a circular economy. And, organic chemistry is literally everywhere. I love to talk about the way that nature works. If you compare the biomass of green plants, which use the same strategies that we're using, which is this organic semiconductor energy conversion, they are something like 450 gigatons of carbon globally. And if you compare that to, say, humans, we are 0.06 gigatons. We don't even we show up as the line on the graph, like the axis on the graph compared to green plants. Even bacteria pale in comparison to green plants. And there's a reason for that. Organic semiconductors doing this energy conversion are the most efficient and most globally scalable. And we should take a lesson from that. And that's what we're trying to do at BioZen.
I love that analogy. Yeah, plants are chemical factories. They take photons, they take CO2 from the atmosphere, and they make wood and fiber and all the stuff for plant life and food, right? We are eating electrons when we eat food.
You're eating sunlight energy.
Yep. Everything runs on the sun. And we're woefully ignorant of this in society. It boggles the mind that we've lost touch with how dependent we are on the sun, and how voluminous it is. It's off the charts. And the thought occurred to me, Nate, though, that we have a lot of infrastructure for moving fluids around in our environment. Gasoline to power cars, ethanol to power a lot of different things, including powering cars. 40% of our corn in the U.S. is converted to ethanol. Hugely inefficient. It's 100 times more efficient to take that land and harvest the photons directly in photovoltaics than it is to convert it to ethanol. But nonetheless, we have this economy that we ramped up with massive government subsidies, and now it's cranking. And those ethanol companies don't want to let go of that, right? That's their business. But we are very familiar with moving fluids around and storing them in tanks, in tankers. And so there's no reason why we can't segue that technology and infrastructure to flow batteries. You could have a flow battery gasoline station, right? And you need to store both the fresh fuel and the used fuel. So you need two sets of tanks. But I mean, heck, we have many sets of tanks because we have at least 3 grades of fuel, maybe 4 with diesel at most gas stations, right? So there's lots of infrastructure for these fluids. No need to store them in containers. That is how CellCube is going to market with containerized, a containerized solution. And there is a CellCube project now in Chicago that I'll be bringing on the show later hopefully this quarter, but if not, maybe the summer. It's a project by Continental Energy Solutions, the EPC I used to work with. But, so
that's great. I love the CellCube people. I've been in touch with them quite a bit. They're fantastic.
Yeah, I'm glad you have a connection there, and look forward to bringing that onto the show. In our last few minutes here, Nate, what else should our listeners know? I'm glad that you mentioned you're raising money. You're in the middle of a seed round, raising $1 million. So if you're an investor, we will put Nate's info in the show notes. You can reach out to BioZen Batteries, and it's a memorable name, so he won't be hard to find. But what else should our listeners know, and how can they more directly contact you?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to send me an email directly, it's nate@biozenbatteries.com. Also, if you go to our website, biozenbatteries.com, you can input your info and your email, and it'll email you our deck from last year and a white paper that we put together. So that's a great place to start. Yeah, like you said, raising money. I love having these conversations just because there's so much to learn, and there's so many moving parts, right? You've mentioned hydrogen, which I think is a super interesting technology. I hope it comes online. The way I like to think about it is like a rising tide raises all boats. And that's where we are with battery storage right now. We need so much more battery storage, but we need different types of energy storage to meet different demand niches, right? A microgrid is different than a car, is different than a city, is different than something that would be needed at a generation facility. We need all of it. I want lithium-ion batteries to have success. I want QuantumScape and Northvolt to succeed in their solid-state lithium, because that helps society see it and adopt it. And I think this ties back into what you were saying. There was a ton of government subsidies for our current infrastructure. we have the capacity to do the same thing with renewable energy. We just need to invest in it. So yeah, there are players there that, maybe are in power, but there's enough to go around to support society, right? So that's what I want to say is, I'm encouraged. I think sure the climate scenario is dire, but we, like you said, at some point, we have the technology to do it. We just need to invest in it. And our approach at BioZen, we're taking inspiration from green plants and using organic semiconductors because we've seen that already scale globally. It is huge. And that is the path forward in my view. I want these batteries to outlive me and outlive everyone that's alive right now. If we can make that, we know it's sustainable. We know that we're supporting society. So that's my vision.
Well said. Check out all of our content at cleanpowerhour.com. Please reach out to me, Tim Montague, on LinkedIn. I love to hear from my listeners. You can also make comments at cleanpowerhour.com. Give us a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify to help others find this content and speed the energy transition. I want to thank Nate Kirchhofer, the CEO and founder of BioZen Batteries, for coming on the show. I'm Tim Montague. Let's grow solar and storage.